Welcome to Tell Me About It, a podcast by SLPs for everybody. My name is Francie.
And my name is Maggie.
And today we are talking about Maggie's favorite topic, research.
Well, it's your favorite topic too.
It is also my favorite topic. I love research. I am not one for conducting it, but I do love to read it.
You were just saying that you got all of your, I'll brag on you for a second. You were just saying you got all of your CEUs done a year early.
Yeah.
For our 3-year cycle.
I love reading research. And shout out to the Informed SLP. That's where I read all of my research. And yeah, I finished all 30 of my CEU credits a year in advance because that's how often I am sitting and reading research. So I do love it.
To keep up our licensure and our C's, like our certificate of clinical competence. As SLPs, we have to complete 30 continuing education units over a 3-year cycle. So it breaks down to about 10 a year. Francie, are you already done with yours? Okay, yeah, you're already done. I had to submit mine last year, so I just started a new cycle this year. And I'm already kind of behind. I'm at
the point where I'm like, do you think can I make it to an ACE? Do you think I can make it to an ASHA ACE? If you read 70, or if you do 70 hours of continuing education, you get an award.
I think you could. I mean, you would have to do 45 education units next year, but
I think I could do it. Starting now until next year, I think I could do it. Check back next year, guys. Let's see if I get an ACE.
We'll see. An ASHA ACE. Hey. Right here on our very own podcast.
Let's see if we do that, because I spend a lot of time reading. I go to research a lot just to make sure my practice is evidence-based. I do it a lot. I looked up cycles recently because I don't think I've ever actually conducted cycles with fidelity.
Yeah. That's a tough one to. It's so what am I like plug and play almost?
It's so plug and play, but you have to keep track of everything. And I'm an A- SLP. Okay, type A-. I'm organized to a point.
Type A-, but you're an A+ SLP.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I am a true type A- person, though. Like my office looks like a bomb went off. But I am pretty on top of it when it comes to things that matter. And right now, it's not organization, and it's also not keeping track of my cycles. So, anyways,
yeah, I am a little bit. Well, I love research. I love reading research, and my approach to it this year has been a little bit more spot treatment-y, which is not preferable, but I've been trying to keep myself up to date on like hot button issues that are coming up, which today we're going to talk about kind of the new bombshell that's entered the villa of SLP world. But I was actually thinking about that because this time last year I was more or less scrambling to get my CEUs in on time. And it was because it was the first cycle I'd ever had to like maintain. And so I was still kind of like learning the process. I wasn't quite sure what I had to do for it, how to track it. And then I wound up being behind. And so I like crammed a bunch of CEUs into the end of the year. But, we got there. And I learned a lot, honestly, from like speed running my CEUs at the end of the year. So, but yeah, wouldn't recommend doing that. So if we can get CEUs as SLPs, we can get these continuing ed units a ton of different ways. So like you can go to a conference, you can take a in-person class, you can watch a seminar. Some webinars offer ASHA CEUs. Some like classes and courses offer CEUs. Or you can do the Informed SLP, which Francie and I both have subscriptions to, which is a really cool resource for SLPs. It's a team of researchers and speech pathologists that basically comb through research as it's coming out and kind of synthesize it into these reviews that make it easier for us to read and digest. It's kind of like the TLDR version of research papers. So it gives us the gist and the important, like salient, applicable parts. And then also it cites the research so that we can go and take a look at it for ourselves, should we want to, which sometimes that's a good thing to do too, to actually look at the article for yourself.
Truly, truly, truly. I really love it. I'm there frequently. So love the Informed
Yeah.
SLP.
The Informed SLP, please sponsor us. We love you.
This is me absolutely like being like, I know her. One of my professors was the creator of the Informed SLP.
Yeah, name drop, do it.
Yeah, Dr. Meredith Harold. I loved her classes. So anyway, shout out to her. I love your service and I use it all the time.
All the time. I'm gotta try not to say as much this time too.
Okay, week 2 of us not saying
week 2.
Oh, it's not going well.
Okay, hang on. Let me think about what I want to say before I say it.
Mindset.
So that way I don't say until I'm ready to talk. But now I lost my train of thought. So
here we are.
Oh, that's what I was gonna say. Dog. Sorry.
That's so real.
Frick. Okay.
Anyways, we'll get there one day. Today's not that day.
Getting back on track. It's so funny because I knew what I wanted to start the sentence by saying, and then I just reflexively said at the beginning.
Okay. This to be a woman,
Seriously. Something that is very popular right now and is growing ever more popular with how widely available information is to most people is this idea of like doing your own research, right? Doing your own research on a topic to make medical decisions for yourself, to make decisions for your kids. It is something that is growing in popularity. And we can talk about, the death of expertise that's kind of happening as well. We can talk about our own issues with big pharma because we're not exactly big pharma lovers over here, not fangirls. But we also need to talk about, okay, if you want to do your own research, here's how. It doesn't just mean watching TikToks. It doesn't just mean reading Facebook posts or even reading news articles necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times when you get research through a filter, there is a spin to it. And that's why we were saying with the Informed SLP, which we love, it's also good to sometimes go to the root of the information and figure it out for yourself. But reading research is a skill. Reading research articles is something that you kind of have to learn how to do. They're really tricky. They're not easy reading most of the time. They use a lot of really specific vocab. They're written in a very structured way. So today we wanted to kind of dissect a research paper with you guys and talk about how we read research to hopefully impart some of that knowledge onto our listeners as well.
And also diving into the actual articles themselves will help give you a more critical eye when it comes to figuring out the quality of evidence that you're reading about. And I think that's super duper duper important in this whole conversation about doing your own research. It's just because the research exists doesn't mean that it is of quality, because there's a lot of really crappy research out there or research design that was not done well, and therefore that evidence might be a little bit suspect. So we're going to talk about how you decipher that.
100%. Not all research is created equal. Not all evidence is created equal or research findings. So yes, it is absolutely very important to know where the data is coming from, how it was collected, so that you can make decisions based upon it.
Do we want to do a quick research methods overview? Just like very
That's
brief.
A great idea. Yeah, that's a great idea.
And what do we mean when we say not all research is created equal? So there's different designs to studies, some that are more evidential and some that are more rigorous than others. And we're going to talk about that. Give me just a second to pull them up.
Because the one we're doing today, I have high hopes for. It's a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study.
I saw that and I was like, oh, this is good. Do we just want to describe experimental research design?
Yeah, we don't have to get too into the weeds, but maybe we can talk about, or we could do it this way too, to just kind of keep it brief. We can talk about what a randomized placebo-controlled double-blind one is versus something like a survey.
Mm-hmm.
Can you run us through some common research methodologies?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different research methods that are out there. Some are better than others. And I think it's going to be important as we go forward to understand what makes quality research and what's out there and available to us. One of the first research design options out there is a pre-experimental research design in which you have a group or many groups are under observation after implementing a factor of cause and effect of the research. So this can include case studies. This can include one group pre-test, post-tests, and this can also include static group comparisons. I often see discourse online talk a lot about case studies, and while a part of the research sphere, not always the most evidential because it's only happening with one single person, and it's unique to that specific case.
What's really great about case studies is that it can kind of open the door to more questions about something. So if a certain person had a specific treatment work really well for their genetic disorder, that's just the story of one person. So it doesn't mean we can automatically take that treatment and apply it to everybody who has that genetic disorder, but it does mean that maybe researchers could go, there might be something to that. Let's conduct more research to find out kind of the mechanism, why that worked for that person, etc.
Same kind of goes for a pre-test, post-test situation. If you don't have a ton of participants or you can't randomly assign a control group, you will take your group of people, give them a pre-test, implement the factor that you're changing, track that, and then give them a post-test and see what changes. Once again, it's not the most evidential, but it's another valid form of research. When we talk about what is kind of the gold standard of research, we're talking about true experimental research design. And this is where you have a control group that does not have any factors, or they are not subjected to any changes. They are truly the same as when they started. Then you will have your test group. That group will experience a variable change or variable introduced to them that is manipulated by the researcher. Most important about this is random distribution. So whatever you are measuring is being randomly assigned to the control in the experimental group. While this is the gold standard, it's not always the most ethical for measuring certain types of things. Just a little note. A great example of this is assigning, I'm looking for my words, hold on. A great example of this would be when you're measuring genetic disorders, like Maggie talked about earlier. We can't randomly assign those things, so you can't participate in that method of research, which leads us to quasi-experimental research design, which is similar. You have a group, variables are being introduced to one, there is a control group. However, the participants are not being randomly assigned, if that makes sense. Did that make any sense?
It does. I would say it makes sense to me because I know what you're talking about.
I know. That's what I'm at. Where I'm like, that was pretty succinct, Francie. But then I've also had like 4 research methods classes.
So I'll go back to the kind of control group that you were talking about, because I think that a lot of people, even if they don't have a ton of personal experience with reading research or conducting research, know what a control group is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and what you said about ethics coming into play here, it is not always appropriate or ethical to have a true control group. Kind of a hot button way to, or something that's been coming up a lot recently in our country about this specifically is with vaccine trials.
Great example.
At this point, it is not ethical to run a control group for a vaccine trial, like a double blind, which is where both the researchers and the participants don't know if they got an active vaccine or not. That's that randomization aspect. That's not ethical because we know the devastating effects that the measles can have. So it would be wrong to willingly subject a group of people to exposure to a disease that could
Kill them.
seriously injure or kill them when we have a safe alternative. So stuff like that has to be, this also comes up in psychological research too. Informed consent is a huge piece. So when people are in drug trials where it is a randomized, double-blind, true control situation, if they're doing an experimental treatment for something, the participants have to know there is a chance that you will not receive the drug for this. There is a chance you will be in the true control group. And they have to understand the consequences of that going in. So that's kind of where the ethics comes in. I think you were talking about randomization with, were you kind of talking about the like single blind versus double blind?
I didn't directly reference it, but I think it is
Okay.
important to know when we're talking about single blind, the participants don't know whether they're getting whether they're in the control group or the experimental group. Double blind is when both the researchers conducting the daily tasks of handing out the medication, administering the whatever, also don't know which is the control and which is the experimental group.
Yeah.
So,
and what that does is get rid of bias in data reporting. So if the participants are aware that an individual has received a drug that is supposed to improve maybe a behavioral aspect, then they might be more likely to report positive findings just because of that baked in inherent bias that we have. This is also kind of where the placebo effect comes into play, if you've heard of the placebo effect before. So there are a ton of different types of studies. There's even a few that we didn't touch on in that list. Things like self-reported surveys or
rating scales.
Rating scales are another big one. And those are great, again, to kind of give us overarching information to then follow leads down. Because I think that anyone who's ever been to the doctor and had to rate their pain on a scale of 1 to 10 knows that rating scales are not the most accurate way to collect information. It is a way to collect information. It's not horrible, but it's also not the most accurate. And same with self-reported symptoms or self-reported results. People have bad memories, and we all are working with internal implicit biases to, report things that are good about ourselves. So they self-reported surveys and rating scales and stuff, they're okay, but I would really recommend to never take that as gospel truth. It's something that it's good information to know, but it's not definitive by any means. Yeah. So the study that we're going to take a look at today is about folinic acid, which is another name for the drug leucovorin. Leucovorin has been in the news recently because it is being looked at as a treatment for people with autism spectrum disorder who have co-occurring language disorders, language delays as well. Well, this study just looks at disorders, but it's being looked at right now as almost this kind of miracle drug, which is another problem because, as we're going to probably see today in some of the findings, it's definitely not a miracle drug, but it is maybe a really good tool to help improve quality of life for people living with autism.
Or with a very specific profile included in their autism diagnosis. I think that's going to be important to distinguish, because this is a supplement. This is not a medication. And I think that's an important distinction here. A disclaimer, We are SLPs. Hello.
Oh yeah, let's
I know
get this out
nothing.
here right now.
I know nothing about pharmacology, and I know nothing about supplements, nutrition, and also how the body processes literally anything other than neurotransmitters.
Mhm.
So that's where I'm at. This is kind of the fascinating part about research from my perspective, is because there's so many things that happen in the world that are being researched that will eventually touch language, and this is one of those things. So
Yeah.
while researching folinic acid is outside of our scope of practice, what is touching our scope of practice is the outcome of the supplementation that they are studying. So,
Yeah, so
disclaimer.
let me go ahead and read the title of this article, which is going to hopefully help make it a little bit, hopefully help it make a little bit more sense. So the title is Folinic Acid Improves Verbal Communication in Children with Autism and Language Impairment, a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial. So we chose this article to talk about specifically because it has some stuff that is very squarely in our scope of practice and some stuff that is outside of it. And you're going to see that in research a lot. So if you are a professional listening right now, maybe a fellow SLP, OTPT, etc., you have your scope and information that you're really well versed in. But there are, like Francie was saying, there are things that touch our field that are not necessarily within our scope of practice. So one of those things for us as SLPs is the diagnosis and treatment of autism spectrum disorder. SLPs are involved in that for sure, but we're not usually the ones leading the charge. We are support players. And that's great because we need teams. But I guarantee there were SLPs that worked on this research study. I guarantee that they were a part of this, conducting this research. But the pharmacological aspects, the like medical, chemical aspects, that's not our field. That's not our wheelhouse. I couldn't tell you. So, but that's how a lot of research is. So I think that this is kind of a real world example of when you're reading something with kind of your set of knowledge, you have to approach new research with the humility of, okay, I'm not going to be an expert on everything in this article. And that's okay because you can still get some information from it, but it's just not going to be whole, I suppose. But yeah, let's go ahead and jump in. And Francie, do you want to talk about how you would approach a research article?
Yeah. So I don't read research top to bottom. I jump around articles like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I will typically start with the introduction, but this is also, you got to remember, when I did so many article reviews in grad school. Big part of our curriculum was being given an article and being able to critically appraise the research that was in it. And you had to do that quickly. And so I jump around really fast.
Yeah.
And then I will go back and fill in if I'm not quite understanding. So when I look at a research article, the very first thing that I do is I read the last paragraph of the introduction.
Oh, I thought you were going to say the last paragraph of the whole thing.
That is really funny. No, the last paragraph of the introduction,
Okay.
and then I jump to the end of the article.
Yeah.
I like to read the last like sentences or two of the introduction. Usually that is their statement of intention of like, this is what we're studying in this research article. So I can at least orient to, okay, this is what we're talking about. This is what you're aiming to measure. Then I will jump down to the results and discussion section.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go over
research
to
articles are not novels. You don't have to start
No.
at the beginning and you don't even necessarily have to
No.
read every single word.
Nope. So the last paragraph of the introduction of this article says, to determine whether high-dose folinic acid can improve core and associated ASD symptoms, we conducted a single-site, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial. It was hypothesized that high-dose folinic acid could alleviate ASD symptoms, particularly in children with folate-related metabolic abnormalities. In addition, We sought to determine if biomarkers of disruption in folate metabolism, such as the FRAA, could predict whether a child could or would respond to folinic acid treatment so that invasive diagnostic procedures such as lumbar punctures might be avoided. That is what the intention of this article is.
Can
Right there.
you do your best to put that in lay terms?
Yes. So what I took from this, is that the researchers of this study wanted to see if they could, if treatment for, hold on, back up, pause.
Mhm.
Let's take it sentence by sentence. To determine whether high-dose folinic acid can improve core and associated ASD symptoms, we conducted a single-site randomized double-blind trial. That's how they did the study, right? They wanted to determine if high-dose folinic acid can improve associated ASD symptoms. Will kids with ASD see a reduction in symptoms if given high-dose folinic acid?
And we talked about the meaning of placebo, double blind. Single site just means it all happened with the same team at the same location.
Yes. So what this is telling me is that this is a decently rigorous study. This is that's a more rigorous research design method. Cool. The next sentence says it was hypothesized, so what they are theorizing is going to happen, that high-dose folinic acid would alleviate ASD symptoms, particularly in children with folate-related metabolic abnormalities. This is the part that's getting outside of our field. So they are theorizing that children who have ASD and also a metabolic disorder, particularly relating to how folate is absorbed and processed in the body, will see the greatest outcomes in the reduction in ASD symptoms. In addition, they sought to determine if biomarkers of disruption in folate metabolism, so they are looking for markers in the body that indicate a disorder of folate absorption, I believe, could predict that a child would respond to a folinic acid treatment. So they're looking for biomarkers in the body to predict outcomes in order to reduce the rate of invasive diagnostic procedures. So they're looking for a different way to be able to diagnose these things without something like a lumbar puncture. Whoa, that was hard.
Yeah. And another thing to be noted is that I believe I'm looking at the flow chart showing how they chose participants for this study. It looks like wound up with 48 participants. And that's also something to keep in mind when you're looking at research. How many people were being studied? Is it a case study where they're literally talking about one person's experience? A lot of times with self-report surveys or rating scales, you'll see numbers in the thousands sometimes because it's really easy to send out a survey and have people respond to it. It's not very expensive either to do so. So with drug trials and with things like this or treatment method trials, you're likely to see lower numbers. But kind of a good rule of thumb is the more the better, because that will give us a better picture of how this can be applied to the general population. So if this study only had 4 participants, we would say, okay, the findings are good. It doesn't completely invalidate it, but it does mean that the results need to be taken with a grain of salt, and probably more research needs to be done with more people. So 48 participants, it's okay. That's a decent number, but yeah, just something to keep in mind as you're reading.
Truly. And then once I am finished reading that last little paragraph, I'm immediately jumping to results and discussion. This results section actually talks about participants. 156 participants were pre-screened, 59 of which were found to potentially meet inclusion-exclusion criteria, of which 11 failed screenings, 10 because of no language impairment, 1 because of congenital hearing impairment. I like reading about how they pick participants because it really does give you some insight into research design once again. What happened?
In this particular article, which by the way is open access, so we will link this article in the show notes for this and in the YouTube doobly-doo, the thingy down at the bottom.
The description?
Yeah, the description. Any other John and Hank Green fans out there? No? Okay.
Mhm.
We will link this. In the introduction, they have a flow chart of how they chose participants and separated them into, well, it was randomized, so that's how they separated them into test groups. But they have a flow chart, which I haven't seen a lot, and I love that because it's one thing to read written out how they selected people for this study, but having that visual is really helpful for my brain for sure. So yeah, ultimately 25 participants were randomized. So that really means what you think it means. They got their test group and they chose 25 participants to receive a placebo and 23 to receive this high dose folinic acid, pardon me. Another thing to note is that the age range for this study is very young. So the age range was 3 years, 4 months to 13 years, 4 months. So as an SLP, that tells me two things. One, this was only pediatrics. Two, that is a wide range of neural development, cognitive development, and language development. So as an SLP, I'm thinking, okay, I want to see in the future more research that has more specific age group breakdowns, because there is a world of difference between the language skills of a 3-year-old and a 13-year-old.
That's a really good point. I actually hadn't thought about that till you just mentioned that.
Oh, here's another. When was this published? I think last year. Oh, no, not last year. This was published in 2016.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Where are we getting the last? Oh, that was the other article that we looked at and decided not to do. Was published last year. This one was published in 2016.
So almost 10 years old.
Yes. Another thing to keep in mind with research is that it ages quickly, especially now. So 10 years, that's not that long. But, well, 9 years, whatever.
Any more than that, though? And it becomes a little bit suspect.
It would depend on what I was looking at the research for. And it also depends on what the research is in. Some things have really strong bodies of evidence where it's not like we're exactly turning over new rocks every single day and finding.
Shout out to motor speech disorders. That research has not changed them.
Yeah. So there are certain things where the research can be 10 years old, it can be 30 years old. And because they are working from such a strong body of evidence, it doesn't matter as much. I definitely do take older research with a grain of salt, though. This only being 9 years old, that's not that old. I would definitely, if I was using this to make decisions, especially if I'm sitting in this position of like, oh, I'm doing my own research for me and my child, I would absolutely be looking for the most up-to-date research. So looking for something that was published this year, last year, the year before, within that kind of age range or time range. But yeah, 9 years it's not, it doesn't discount it by any means. It just means that in the time that has passed since, there may be new findings or updated findings.
So the primary outcome reported in the results section states that improvements in verbal communication was significantly greater for participants on folinic acid as compared to participants on the placebo with a medium to large effect size. We had a stats episode. I think we talked about it then. Watch it. I'm not explaining it again. Let's see here. Separate analyses were conducted for each biomarker of folate metabolism. Once again, out of my scope of practice. In general, improvement in verbal communication was significantly greater in participants on folinic acid as compared to those on the placebo for participants with abnormal folate metabolism, i.e. FRAA positive, low glutathione. I don't know. Redox ratio.
Way out of
my scope of practice.
But we can say that in layman's terms, that basically means even though they both had these markers for difficulty with folate metabolism, the group that received folinic acid did show more improvement in verbal language over the group receiving the placebo, indicating that maybe there's something there. Maybe there is something to the folinic acid supplement.
The next sentence is important. For participants with biomarkers indicating more normal folate metabolism, improvements in verbal communication was not significantly different between groups. So what my SLP brain is now thinking is that supplementing folate in kids with ASD and a folate disorder did improve verbal language outcomes. That's cool. For kids who have autism and no folate metabolic disorder, it did not improve outcomes. So it wouldn't be an appropriate aspect of this child's treatment, if this makes sense. Anyways, fascinating.
Yeah. That is really good to know.
Secondary outcomes. Table 3 outlines secondary outcomes, including the minimal clinically important difference. The daily living skills on the VABS significantly improved in the folinic acid group as compared to the placebo group. Adherence to the questionnaires. Adherence on the paternal questionnaires was not significantly different across treatment groups. Irritability, lethargy, stereotyped behavior, hyperactivity, inappropriate speech, and total score on the ABC significantly improved in the folinic acid group as compared to the placebo group. Stereotypic behavior and total scores significantly improved for the folinic acid group as compared to the placebo group on the ASQ. Internalizing problems significantly improved for the folinic acid group as compared to the placebo group on the BASC. Teacher questionnaires were not analyzed since adherence was below 35%. Interesting. So they also sent a questionnaire out to teachers, and they did not have a ton of teachers respond, so they just did not report that data.
Yeah.
Good to know.
It is good to know. And the reason that they would do that is to see effects across settings. So it's good to see changes at home, but we all know that we behave differently at home than we do at work or at school or out in public. So sending questionnaires to teachers gives the researchers more data about how the behavior is changing overall. Unfortunately, they weren't able to include it, but that's why it was even sent out in the first place, if that makes sense.
The next section is the discussion section, which goes to synthesize all of the numbers that were just reported. They state this study found an improvement in an important core ASD symptom, verbal communication, in non-syndromic ASD children receiving high-dose folinic acid versus a placebo, particularly in those participants who were positive for FRAAs or for that metabolic disorder of folinic acid. Improvements in a number of secondary outcomes were observed as well, with no significant adverse events. The effects of folinic acid is consistent with therapeutic effects of early behavioral intervention. Wait, I'm going to read that again. The effects of folinic acid is consistent with the therapeutic effects of early behavioral interventions. I wonder what they mean by
that. So, great question. After that sentence, they have two teeny little numbers, 39 and 40. So that means that they cited some additional research.
I'm scrolling down to 39 and 40.
That's what I would do as well. And so then you can go scroll on down to the references and paste it into Google Scholar. Heck yeah, it is also open access. So that will bring you to another research article. This one called A Randomized Trial Comparison of the Effects of Verbal and Pictorial Naturalistic Communication Strategies on Spoken Language for Young Children with Autism.
Welcome to the knit sweater of research where you start pulling a thread and now you just keep going.
This is also what we mean by body of research. So people who are conducting research aren't just coming in cold. They are coming in with these. There are 70 other articles referenced in this study. Honestly, there's only page and a half of references for this article. That's not even that many. It's usually, I was telling Francie off camera that in grad school, if I had an article that I had to read for class and I was running behind, I would download the PDF and look at it and be like, oh my gosh, 36 pages. I'm never going to be able to read this in time. And then I would think, wait, how many pages are references? Sometimes it was 5 or 6 pages of references that they are drawing from to, go forth in their study. So this is what we mean by research. This is what we mean by body of evidence. I would guess, based on those 2 articles that are cited, and then I guess I didn't look at the other one.
What I think they're trying to say is that the outcomes they saw on verbal speech matched the outcomes of these 2 intervention strategies cited in these research articles. If I had to bet.
That's exactly what I was going to say too. I think that is 100% the case. So they used these 2 other studies to base that statement off of, which is really great. And also that's a great finding.
Yeah, that's a really, as an SLP, I'm like, that's awesome.
Yeah, well, and as an SLP, I know that therapy is expensive. It is time consuming. And if a child has this genetic marker and is able to take a supplement that has the same effects as going to months of therapy, how great for them, right? Because ultimately that's what we want. We want the child to be able to communicate effectively. And therapy is one way to do that. This does behavioral interventions too. And one of the studies cited was a parent implemented intervention, which is great. So they're not necessarily talking about speech therapy here, but that's a really exciting finding, right?
I'm kind of scrolling through the discussions and we're getting to my favorite part of any research, which is discussing the limitations.
Heck yeah. I knew you were headed there next.
I do it. I really enjoy reading limitations, and I like when authors are very open about the fact that not everything can be perfect, and this is everything that went wrong or we have to consider as a factor as to why the research came out the way it did. And according to the authors, this study had limitations. First, the small sample size.
Every study has limitations.
Every study has limitations. And I really also think this is just theorizing. This is just Francie coming out, not SLP Francie. This is just Francie coming out. I really think the quality of the researcher and the stand-upness, I don't know where I'm going with this. I think if you have a really strong limitation section, I think it speaks to your credentials as a researcher. If your limitations suck, I think your research probably also sucks. But also feel free to cut that if that's wrong. But I
love that. And actually, as you said that, I was like, I'm going to clip that for social media because if you're not open and honest about your limitations in your study, it makes me a little suspect. It makes me a little like, I don't know if I agree with that. But this study had limitations. First, the small sample size may have resulted in an imbalance in baseline language scores for one subgroup and limited the sensitivity of the analyses to detect some treatment effects. Second, the single site design only provides limited generalization of these results. Beautiful. Yeah, so basically what they're saying there, we talked about sample size earlier. We talked about the fact that there's only 48 participants in this study. Not terrible, not amazing, right? That's a pretty small group. There's also a really big age range. So some of the kiddos included in this study were like 3.5. Some of them were 13. So within that, and if they are impacted by their autism diagnosis to the extent that they're not speaking very much, they have, especially some of those older kids, have almost definitely been through some kind of therapeutic treatment before. So that's what they're kind of noting here, is that there may have been an imbalance in the language scores for one of the subgroups, just due to the fact that some of the kids had probably received therapy, speech therapy, language therapy in the past.
They also say that third, although no adverse events were identified, safety of this treatment requires further study since many folate studies utilize lower dose in healthy population. Fourth, further studies will be needed to determine the optimal folinic acid dose. The oral bioavailability of folate is strongly influenced by the enteric microbiome. But there is enteric, what? Yeah, enteric.
Enteric, enteric, yeah.
The oral bioavailability of folate is strongly influenced by the enteric microbiome, but there's strong evidence that the enteric microbiome is altered in children with ASD. And I know nothing about that. So that is, once again, out of my scope.
This is out of our scope. Here's how I would dissect that sentence, though. Enteric and microbiome make me think gastroenterology. And so I also clicked on the research that was cited there. This is the same researcher, a study, Fry et al. Approaches to studying and manipulating the enteric microbiome to improve autism symptoms. This was a study that the same researcher published with his team, or their team, the year before this one came out. So what that tells me is that there's something going on with our gut microbiome and folinic acid, or the bioavailability of folate. Now, again, like Francie said, this is outside of our scope of practice. That's all I really need to understand about this, is that there's something else going on there. That limitation is a note for people who study gut microbiomes, and I'm going to leave it at that because I don't study gut microbiomes. But yeah, it kind of opens the door for a new pathway, a new avenue of research. It then goes on to talk about the difference between folinic acid and other drugs that are approved by the FDA for treatment of ASD, adding some more context to these findings, which is also important. Is there anything you wanted to add from the discussion section, Francie, or do you want to jump down?
I was looking through kind of conclusions and then conflicts of interest.
Yes.
Just because I'm down here. I, once again, was like, I don't do lumbar puncture, so I'm going to breeze through that. Since ASD is a lifelong disorder, the long-term adverse effects of any treatment is a concern. Fair enough. As folinic acid may become increasingly used as ASD treatment in the future, short-term and long-term adverse side effects should be studied. Agreed.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Conclusion: in this small trial of children with non-syndromic ASD and language impairment, treatment with high-dose folinic acid for 12 weeks resulted in improvements in measures of verbal communication as compared to the placebo. These findings should be considered preliminary until treatment is assessed in larger multi-center studies with longer durations. Cool.
Yeah,
agree with
that's
that.
Awesome. And so that is a great TLDR for this. And importantly, these findings should be considered preliminary until treatment is assessed in larger studies with longer duration. And that is so important because I think that a lot of times studies like this with positive findings, really promising findings, and that are about a topic that is really hot right now in pop culture, and as it well should be. Autism affects so many people and, again, is lifelong, so we absolutely should be talking about it. The findings of studies like this can be taken as fact just off the bat. And that, I think, is what's kind of playing into this leucovorin folinic acid miracle drug situation that we're kind of in right now, where, yeah, there are studies with really promising findings, but this is still preliminary. And even though this was 10 years ago, research moves really slowly. So while there is likely updated research, we're still kind of in the beginning stages of figuring out whether or not this is going to be something that is a real winner.
Sorry, I'm reading the conflicts of interest and acknowledgements. This is also fascinating because oftentimes this is where you find out where the funding is coming from. And it's good to know.
It is, yeah.
EVQ and JMS are investors in a patent for the detecting of the auto antibodies described in this study. US patent lists the patent number. issued to the Research Foundation of the State University of New York. REF and EVQ are members of the Scientific Advisory Board to Iliad Neurosciences Incorporated. The remaining authors declare no conflict of interest. Acknowledgement: this research was supported in part by Lee Silsby Compounding Pharmacy to REF, Autism Speaks, Brennan Hornstein Autism Research and Education Foundation, Fraternal Order of the Eagles, Autism Research Institute, and the Jane Botsford Johnson Foundation. This trial is registered on clinicaltrials.gov. All interesting information. I think it's interesting that Autism Speaks was there.
I do too. So EVQ and JMS and REF, those initials are referring to authors on the paper, co-authors on the paper. And really all this is telling me is who they were getting paid by. Mm-hmm. It's not surprising that people who are the inventors of a patent for detecting these antibodies are doing research on the antibodies, like how to treat the effect of antibodies. That's not shocking.
That's not surprising.
It's not surprising that a compounding pharmacy is funding this. A compounding pharmacy is a pharmacy that makes medications with very specific dosages. It's not surprising that they're involved in a drug trial. Not surprising to me that foundations like Autism Speaks or the Autism Research and Education Foundation are involved in this. None of this is particularly shocking. I will say that it is important to know where research is coming from. It's important to know where the money is coming from. And it's also important to know where it was published. So, and we probably should have done this before we started talking about it, but we got this from the Informed SLP, which we both already trust. So that's probably why we didn't look it up to begin with. This article was published in Molecular Psychiatry. Let me look up that journal.
Reputable journals are so important. You're so right, Maggie.
I am not familiar with that. All right, so this is, again, from the Google AI overview. If I was getting this research article from a source that I trusted less than the Informed SLP, so I'm relying on my girl. I'm relying on the Informed SLP to give me research that's high quality. I trust them to do that. This is from the Google AI overview in answer to the question, is Molecular Psychiatry a peer-reviewed journal? Yes, it is. And that means that before these articles can be published, they are reviewed by other researchers. Other researchers sit there and pick these bad boys apart and then send it back to the team and say, answer these questions. That peer review process is criticism of the articles to make sure that they are rigorous, that they're accurate. And if an article can't stand up to peer review, then it doesn't get published. Sometimes there are journals that publish articles that are not peer reviewed, and you can pay to have a research article published in a journal like this. So it's important to know whether or not a journal has this peer review process. So yeah.
The next thing that I would read after I've done all this, I know where their funding is coming from. I know their outcomes. The next question I ask myself is, how did they do that? And I find that in the methods section.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to note this about the methods section for this one. So because this is a drug trial, it's not, sometimes the methods are really bulky. It's if they are studying a treatment or trying to find evidence of a cognitive process that's hard to see on the outside, something like that. Sometimes the study design for the methods can be really convoluted, and you're thinking to yourself, how the heck did they get this information? Methods is where you want to go. She is your girl. For this one, my guess is going to be method. We gave them drug. They consumed drug. We collected data. But I think for this one, it might be a little bit more straightforward, which is a good thing for us because it's easier to explain.
Yes. So the study was approved by the the IRB at University of Arkansas for medical sciences. So this happened pretty close to me, LOL.
The IRB also is it's the International Review Board, right?
Yes, Institutional Review Board.
So that is a board that makes sure that everybody's behaving ethically and is doing the things that they are supposed to do.
So once they've determined participants who met their inclusion and exclusion criteria, they were screened for a language impairment. Pre-verbal children qualified, sorry, I have to scroll now, as language impaired. That's an interesting distinction. Pre-verbal children.
That is an interesting distinction, actually, because I wouldn't. Well, okay, the youngest was 3.
Yeah, pre-verbal.
So if we're pre-verbal at 3,
25 functional words. Children qualified.
I would also qualify them as language impaired.
I agree with that. Otherwise, the age-appropriate version of the SELF, which is an assessment that Maggie and I both give, confirmed language impairment. Language impairment was defined as a core standardized score of less than 85 if the preschool version was used, or failure on the SELF screener if other versions were used. Got any comments on that?
No, we talked about standardized tests in our stats episode a little while back. So 85 or lower on the SELF, which is the clinical evaluation of language fundamentals. There's also a preschool version, would be 1 standard deviation below the mean. I believe a standard deviation on the SELF is 15. So yeah, that's a pretty boilerplate way to.
Mm-hmm.
Now, yeah, we could get really into the SLP weeds about, well, is the SELF the best standardized test to use for diagnosing? We're not going to do that.
We're not going to get into that.
It makes sense how they qualified these kids as language impaired. That tracks to me. Checks out. Let's see here. For those confirmed to have language impairment, they were randomized to the Folinic acid or placebo group, and a fasting blood sample was obtained. Randomization was performed using a random number generator with a block size of 4. The research pharmacist had exclusive access to the randomization allocation. After breakfast, the participants returned for the language developmental and behavioral assessments. Following these assessments, the families were given the 12 weeks of interventions and were instructed on its administration. Language development and behavioral assessments were repeated after 12 weeks of treatment. Ta-da! They also had questionnaires that resulted in at baseline, at 6 and at 12 weeks. After starting treatment, parents were asked to deliver baseline questionnaires to teachers and therapists. After the first week, questionnaires were mailed to the parents and teachers at least 1 week prior to the target date of completion. Parents were asked to bring the completed teacher and parent 12-week questionnaires to the final assessment. Other questionnaires were returned in pre-addressed postage-paid envelopes. Then it talks about the intervention, which is the drug stuff, which once again, I'm like, cool, I believe you. Yeah, we don't have the knowledge to pick that apart, so we're not going to try because it would be irresponsible to do so.
Mm-hmm.
So some things you just gotta believe that it's as accurate as it can be based on what we know about this article so far.
Mm-hmm. It then goes to talk about outcome measures and the data that was collected. All primary and secondary outcomes were obtained at baseline and study end. Questionnaires were also requested 6 weeks after starting the intervention. Aside from the research pharmacist, study staff, participants, parents, and teachers were blinded to treatment allocation. There's that double blind part.
Interesting. Sorry, just as I was scrolling, This is an outcome measures. I noticed they said it should be acknowledged that communication impairment was considered a core feature of ASD up until the DSM-5, which has now combined communication and social symptoms into a social communication symptom cluster. In the DSM-5, language impairment is recognized as a significant comorbidity interrelated to the ASD diagnosis. So another piece of this is that this study was published, I believe, in 2016, but it takes longer to conduct research than just, it probably took a while to get all of this. When was the DSM-5 published?
Before 2016, because it was
2013.
Yeah, I was going to say we had the DSM-5 when I was in undergrad.
Yeah. So basically that tells me that in the amount of time that this study was conducted and published, some of the core features of ASD technically changed. It's just important to note because I think it adds more context to like how long of a process research can be, even something that is as seemingly short-lived as a 12-week supplement trial, So that just is a little tidbit to kind of add context to the greater picture of how long it takes to conduct research. So yeah, that's kind of how we pick apart research. And yeah, that's it. This was a pretty solid article that I would say I would be willing to trust the findings in this article. I would be likely to trust them and apply them to kind of add it to my knowledge of things we know about autism, things we know about folinic acid. So when conversations about leucovorin come up, we know it's not a miracle drug. This study also admitted that. But
it was best served for kids who had co-occurring metabolic disorders impacting the absorption of folate. Yep. So if somebody's like, oh my gosh, leucovorin, you can be like,
hang on now.
No.
Yeah. And from this, we also see that research is still emerging, right? It's not set in stone yet. So maybe it will be someday, who knows?
Yeah, more research to be had.
But yeah, that's kind of how we go about reading research. And hopefully that was helpful and not like super confusing and dry. We think it's cool.
Like that. I was going to say, sometimes, man, I think it's fun. I had a great time right now.
Yeah. We're just two giant nerds who love to read research articles. Yeah. So maybe next time we should do an article that is maybe not as awesome. This was a pretty solid research article from a reputable journal that had strong findings, strong limitations, etc.
Strong design, strong publication. It was a good article. And I loved it. It was written very well. And the research was done well. And it was interesting. Cool. Added bonus. Doesn't have to be interesting, but added bonus.
Yeah. Maybe we can do another one of these episodes where we read one that is the design is perhaps not as rigorous, and maybe they have some really cool findings, but the way that they got there leaves something to be desired. Because believe me, those articles are out there, and a lot of times they get held up as equal to studies like this that are really solid, when in fact they are not comparable. So that might be something. It'll be fun for us. That's for sure.
We're gonna have fun.
I don't know if it'll be fun for you guys.
If not,
if you're as nerdy as we are, it will be. But all right, let's go ahead and wrap up this episode of Tell Me About It. We are on Spotify and YouTube at Tell Me About It and SLP Podcast. We are also on Instagram at Tell Me About It SLP. We hope this cleared a few things up for you, and we can't wait to tell you more about it next time. Bye.
See you in the next one. Bye.